23 tonight, and we last week we were looking at this topic in Proverbs 23 of raising kids. So we kind of walked our way through some of these details. We were talking about how to raise your kids, how to discipline, why you discipline, and we really kind of built off of that idea here in Proverbs 23, where it talks about verse 13, withhold not correction from a child. All right, and there's this idea that you are choosing who to teach, what to teach, and then at the end of the day, your children are your responsibility to teach, so you need to teach them. And there's a level of that just goes, take responsibility. I had a friend of mine this week whose kid had to go into the hospital, and so he's like, pray for my spawn. I was like, I kind of like the way that's a funny way to put it. But you think about it, like if you spawned something into the world called having a child, you're responsible for it. All right, like you got to train it, you got to teach it, and we've used a few illustrations in Proverbs leading up to this point where I use the illustration like when I sight in a rifle. And we keep coming back to some of those illustrations where it's kind of a constant tweaking to make sure you got it right. And really, whatever you're doing, if you're, I am very well versed in escape roomology because that's what I did for a long time. But what do you do when you build an escape room? You build it, you let someone test it, and you realize these are all the things I did wrong. And then you say, well, that's your problem. And what do? You go back in and you tweak it a little bit. And then you tweak it a little bit. And then you let someone else play it, and you go, okay, they didn't understand that. They broke that. That didn't go well, and you tweak it again. And what got really frustrating for me as the manager is there were times where other people would go in and start tweaking it for me, and I was like, that's not your, stop it. And I would come in and look around and be like, who put this here? And it was like, oh, so-and-so. And I'm like, no, that needs to go back out. And if you've ever raised kids, you understand this illustration. There are times where you're sitting there trying to work with your kid on something, and you're correcting, and you're building, and then like this random other dude comes in and adds stuff, and you're like, no, get that out of here. And that's this idea of training up a child. You're going to keep constantly coming back and tweaking. But where Proverbs 23:13 goes is it says, withhold not correction from a child. And then it's using this kind of extreme language on purpose. And it initially offends our ears when we hear it. Because it says, if thou beatest him with a rod, he will not die. And like the sensitive people are like, how dare you? Okay, but the idea it's getting at is you're correcting them, and the correction that you're going to give is so much more gentle than the correction that the world is going to give. Okay? So if you leave your children to be raised by the world, you are leaving your children to be raised by something that might actually kill them. And that's why it's saying it in this extreme way. So it brings it out, and that's where we talk. But I want you to go back a few verses, and remember, we dealt with this one too, which we said, control your what? There you go. Control your appetite. And we started off Proverbs 23, verse 1 and 2 and 3, and it's all this idea of control your appetite so it doesn't control you. Then we went to the next one, and it's the idea of correction and knowing what to do, and we walked our way through those two ideas really thoroughly the last few weeks. Then we get to the last half of Proverbs 23. And I want you to see where all of these themes come together. And it comes together in a really kind of awkward way. I'll just freely admit it. But Proverbs is dealing with real life scenarios where basically you've got a dad who's sitting down with his kid and saying, these are the things that are going to destroy you, and you need to be aware of them. And so what it starts with is control your appetite. And then it says, be willing to correct. Be willing to look out for the well-being of your kid to the point that you're saying, no, you're not going there. No, you're not doing that. And what I want to do is, as you look at the last half of Proverbs 23, there's going to be two specific sins that are tied together. And I want you to notice this because, again, it's a father talking to his sons, but this is going to apply even more broadly as well. But I want you to notice specifically the illustration he uses. So look what happens. Verse 5. Okay? So, verse 15. He says, my son, if thine heart be wise. Okay? So he's right off the bat saying, I know that you have some foolishness bound up in you. I know you've got some tendencies toward this way. My son, if you're going to be wise and you're going to act like a wise person, here's what you need to do. If your heart is wise, my heart will rejoice. And so here's a dad talking to his son and saying, hey, son, there's just going to be some things that you do that are going to grieve me. If you allow yourself to go down this road, I just want you to know it's going to grieve me too. And it's going to grieve you, but it's going to grieve me too. So if you're wise, pay attention to what I'm about to say, and I'll rejoice with you. And that's this idea of saying, I am willing to correct my kid because they're my kid, and I love them, and I care for them, and I don't want to see them end up this bad way. And so he says, my son, if thine heart be wise, my heart shall rejoice, even mine. Yea, my reins shall rejoice when thy lips shall speak right things. And so the idea is a child that's doing the right thing is going to rejoice the parents. A child that's doing the wrong thing is going to be heaviness or grief to his parents. That's borne out throughout several other proverbs. But look at where it goes. He goes, okay, let not thine heart envy sinners. Okay? So when you look out at wickedness, when you look out at the sinful way, don't let your heart start going after them. Don't let your heart envy sinners. But be thou in the fear of the Lord all day long. And so he's looking and he says, all right, son, I want you to understand that. First of all, we understand this idea of control your appetites. Don't envy sinners. Don't go lusting after what they have. Don't go chasing after what they have. But I also, and I'm going to remove this correction idea because we understand that's what we're getting at. He says, control your appetites, but fear God. And that sounds cliche, and that sounds trite. You're like, oh, I need to fear God. But think about what he has just said. Do not envy sinners, but fear God. So whatever he's about to get at, whatever he's about to get into, he's saying, if you get your eyes off of the Lord and you start living for your appetites or you start living for whatever you desire, you will actually lose the fear of the Lord and you're going to actually end up in a foolish spot. So again, I want you to kind of see this build up. I want you to see where he's going with it. Because if you fear the Lord, it's going to keep you from sin. If you control your appetites, it's going to keep you from sin. If you got those two down, you're probably pretty set. You don't really have to worry too much about, well, what about the finer points of, okay, fearing God first so you don't get tempted to draw away, and control your appetites so they don't control you. And the sins that you're going to get into at the end of this chapter come down to, I don't fear the Lord, and I'm living by whatever I want to do. So I want you to see how this builds out. Look what it goes. Let not thine heart envy sinners, but be thou in the fear of the Lord all the day long. For surely there is an end, and thy expectation shall not be cut off. So he's saying if you do it God's way, it will have lasting benefits. If you do it your own way, yeah, that expectation is going to get cut off real quick. The Bible says there's pleasure in sin for a season. And you look, it's a buildup. And he keeps hitting it from different angles just to kind of complete the whole picture and say, if you do not control your appetite, if you don't fear the Lord, you're going to walk into all sorts of sins that are going to completely obliterate you. Look at it goes. Okay, hear thou, my son, and be wise, and guide thine heart in the way. I used this illustration a few weeks ago. I said, you need to let your mind tell your brain what to do. Okay, so you almost need to picture it, that you're piloting your body. Okay, your body doesn't tell you what to do. You tell your body what to do. Okay, so you're going to have that spike of hormones, you're going to have those desires, you're going to have those things that you look at, and that's why God's going to repeatedly say, don't walk in the sight of your own eyes, don't go in the way of your heart, like you get that thing under control. So you almost have this idea that your mind is telling your body what to do. And the moment you get that backwards, and your body is driving everything you want to do, you're going to be completely off the rails. And that's why he's saying, you need to guide your heart. Your heart doesn't guide you. If you want a more complicated example, because I'm great at complicated examples, Ecclesiastes is using the illustration of the wise man's heart is at his left and his right, and it uses all that illustration. And it's a big, complicated illustration, but the idea was the king would be sitting here, and his advisor would be sitting at his right hand. And so the king is going to sit here, and so when it talks about the wise man's heart is at his right hand, it's the idea that the heart is an advisor, but it's not actually the one telling him what to do. The king's in charge. And the Ecclesiastes is going to use that language where it's like a king sitting on his throne and his advisor's sitting next to him, but the king's really the one in charge. And so Solomon's going to say, if you're a fool, you're sitting on the right side and your heart's telling you what to do. If you're the king of your life, you're sitting here and you're telling your heart what to do. And that's the same illustration where he says, you need to be wise and you need to direct your heart. You need to be the one who's in charge, telling your heart what to think, what to feel, how to act. And you never let it be, I'm just going in the desires of my own heart. So again, it comes back to control your appetite and fear God. Let's keep going. Verse 20, he goes, here's the first thing that you're going to run into: envying evildoers, sitting to eat with a ruler. You notice there's a lot of these things that say, okay, you're sitting there and there's going to be the temptation to go along with them. So be careful. So that's what verse 20. Be not among the winebibbers, nor among the riotous eaters of flesh. Okay, we don't talk like that anymore. All right? You know, like a wine bibber. Okay, it's the drunks, the riotous eaters of flesh, the gluttons. And what is this all about? Control your appetite. These things that you desire, these things that you want to go after, you understand if you're going for pleasure and you're just going all in, you're going to be a glutton and a drunkard. Don't go that way. And so here's a dad talking to his son and saying, son, I know you have a little bit of impulse control problems. Son, I know that you have an issue with controlling yourself. So guess what? If you're at a party, you're not picking up the alcohol because I don't think you can handle it. In fact, you probably better not even be at that party. You know, and you guys have heard me use this illustration. I said, let's assume for a moment that there's nothing wrong with alcohol. Still shouldn't drink it. That's my philosophy. Even if there were nothing wrong with it, I still wouldn't touch it. Because over and over and over, the Bible says it is such a dangerous thing and you're just opening yourself up to temptation. I mean, what good comes from it? And you look over and over and over throughout the scripture, and if we have time tonight, we'll look at a few passages that speak of alcohol positively and walk through that. But overwhelmingly, what does the Bible have to say about alcohol? Don't do it. Stay away from it. Why? Because it's like leaving a loaded gun by your bedside. It's just kind of dumb. And the idea he's getting at here is, again, you're going to find it hard to control your appetites, son. So be careful. Don't put yourself in the spot where you're going to compromise what you know to be right. Don't put yourself in the spot where you're going to have the opportunity to indulge. Control your appetite and fear the Lord. Stop envying these wicked men because it's not going to end well for you. And that's what he's trying to get across. And so he says, be not among the winebibbers. Don't be among the riotous eaters of flesh. And look, he doesn't even get into the moral aspects. You notice that? As he goes through this last half of Proverbs 23, he's not getting into a moral discussion about whether alcohol is right or wrong. He goes, no. Look what happens to the people who drink. Look what happens. Look at the end result of every single one of these people is. He could have gotten into the moral aspect. He could have gotten into it's displeasing to the Lord. No, but what is he doing? He goes, a drunkard and a glutton, they're going to come to poverty. Like literally. Okay, and drowsiness is going to clothe the man in rags. So what is he doing? He says, if you live for your appetites, you're the type of guy who goes, man, I'm just going to have one more drink. Congratulations. You've now drunk yourself into poverty. You're not going to control yourself. And he says, drowsiness is going to cloak a man in rags. Well, you notice how these are all connected. It's, I'm living for my appetite. I don't feel like getting up in the morning. I don't want to go to work. I remember when I used to have to travel a good distance to get to work. I had to go to like 5:30 and all that. 5:30 comes really early, and I'm like, I don't want to see this time. Like, I'm up before the sun. I should not be up before the sun. I don't want to get up. And I certainly don't want to teach for several hours back to back and then travel home and then do my other job. I don't want to do this. I don't get a choice. I need to get out of bed. Get up. Go to work. And that's the thing where he's saying, like, if you are a drunkard and if you are a glutton and if you are lazy and just not going to work, he goes, congratulations. This is going to be the end result of who you are. You need to have that impulse control. And then look at verse 22. He says, hearken unto the father that begat thee. Despise not thy mother when she is old. And so what he's doing is he comes back and he goes, okay, I know that we're out of date. And I know that whatever it is that you think, you're like, well, I know better than my parents because they've only lived on earth 2 or 3 times longer than I have. They can't possibly know anything. And that's, again, I notice I've worked with teenagers enough in my life. The vast majority of my life I've been working with teens. And you can notice certain trends that crop up among the teens. Okay? And it pops up, and you can kind of go, okay, so this is obviously something they're listening to because I'm noticing it crop up across all of these teenagers. And what happens? A lot of times with teenagers, it's, I came upon this thing, and I think it's true, and therefore I know more than the adults who may have actually lived through this situation. Because clearly I read a few articles online and listened to a TikTok, and so clearly I know more. Again, that's what you see. And now, they might be right. They might be. And in fact, there are times where, there's things I've lived through, and then you fast forward 10, 20 years, and you're like, we've got more information. We were wrong. Okay, that happened. But there's a wisdom that comes from parents, and there's a wisdom that comes from grandparents, and there's wisdom that comes from great-great-grandparents, because they've had to live a few things. And look what he says here. He says, my son, listen to me. And again, it goes back to withhold not correction from whom it is due. It's the idea that I am correcting you not because I love correcting you, but because I really, really don't want the world to do the correcting. So there are things that I'm going to say because I care about you and I want to protect you. And so he's saying, my son, listen to your father. I care about you. I begat you. And then he goes, despise not thy mother when she is old. Because again, there's going to be times where you look at what your mom says and go, mom. And he goes, just be careful. Guard yourself from that attitude. Have some respect. Control your appetites. Fear the Lord. Not saying you have to do everything they say, but you're controlling yourself. And look where it goes the last half. He goes, buy the truth. Sell it not. Also wisdom and instruction and understanding. The father of the righteous shall greatly rejoice, and he that begetteth a wise child shall have joy in him. The father and thy mother shall be glad, and she that bare thee shall rejoice. My son, give me thine heart, and let thine eyes observe my ways. And so here is the challenge from a dad to follow me. And that's a conviction as a dad. That's a high responsibility as a dad to look at your kids and say, I am going to be someone you can model your life after. Follow me. We see Paul do this, spiritually speaking, where he looks at the church and he says, hey, follow me as I follow Christ. It's a big deal. It's a big deal to come alongside and say, son, control your appetite. Use me as an example. Because if you're not controlling your appetites, that's kind of rough. Hey, son, you need to fear God, and you can follow me as an example of what it's like to fear God. Hey, my son, control your appetites. Don't be a glutton. Don't be a drunkard. Don't be lazy. Follow me as an example. Because then you actually have to do it. But then, look at these two sins that are tied together. And look what he says. He goes, my son, I'm going to be an example for you. My son, these sins that I'm about to get into, I'm going to be an example, and you can watch me, and you can see that I won't fall into these either. But it's a convicting thing, because you have to live it too. Now look what it says. For it talks about a whore, a prostitute. It goes, she's a deep ditch, and a strange woman is a narrow pit. She lieth in wait as for a prey, and increaseth the transgression among men. Okay, that's about all he has to say about that, because he has talked about that thoroughly leading up to this. And so he says, okay, so the one sin is, I'm just going to say, for politeness sakes, woman stuff. And we all understand what that means. But it's the idea of I'm going to be unfaithful. The idea that I'm going to go after my desires, and I really don't care what my vows are. I don't care what I've committed to. I don't care what any of this is. I'm going to go after sinful things in this arena because I want to. And it's that idea of I am not going to control myself. I'm just going to do whatever I want to do. And he says, that is going to lead you into a deep ditch. That's going to lead you into a trap you can't get back out of. You go to Proverbs 6, Proverbs 7, I let you fill in the blanks on all the other things that come along with that. But I want you to notice, because I said there's two sins that are going to get tied together. And again, all comes down to control your appetite. No matter what it is, control your appetite. Proverbs 23 started off with, you're sitting to eat with a ruler. Nothing wrong with that. You're sitting to eat. But he goes, you better watch out your motives. Take yourself hostage if you're going to be a guy given an appetite. Control your appetite. Fear God. Don't be envious of evildoers. It's going to walk you into a trap. And then the dad is now coming along as an example to his kids saying, I am worthy to follow. And you can follow to make sure I'm not falling into this myself. And like I said, there's these two sins that are tied together. One is the woman stuff. But look at the last half here. Who hath woe, verse 29. Who hath sorrow? Who hath contentions? Who hath babblings? Who hath wounds without cause? Who hath redness of eyes? I had a friend who struggled with this, and he chose to live in Las Vegas of all places. The number of phone calls I got that it was incoherent. And it's this. It's the jabbering. It's the forgetting everything that we just talked an hour for. It long conversations, and you talk the next day, and they have no memory of having that conversation with you. And then they claim, I wasn't drunk. I'm like, I'm pretty sure you were. What? Why are you living in Vegas? You're walking right past the bar on your way home from work. You're stressed out. What do you think you're going to do? And the number of phone calls I got that were basically this. Babblings. I did this thing again. I struggled in this area again. And what he's doing is he's saying, you have this struggle, but you also have the struggle with what we'll just call wine. Now, one thing we've got to take into account as we deal with this topic, and we've dealt with it before, so I'm not going to dig into it too deeply. The alcohol in the Bible was nowhere near the potency of what we've got today. So you think they're talking about something that could be 5% alcohol, if that. They didn't have the ability to fortify alcohol to the level that we do today. We can get, I think you can get up to like 50% with some of the alcohols. I mean, it's ridiculous, the level of alcohol you can hit. And if you can think that at a 5% level alcohol, they were warning you to say, you might want to be careful like this. It would be like me handing you a Nerf gun and saying, you might want to be careful that you don't point this Nerf gun at the wrong person. And you're like, yeah, I should be careful with this Nerf gun. And then I hand you like a 40 cal. Okay, they're both guns, but one is way more potent than the other. And so if you're going to have to be careful with a Nerf gun, you might as well just not even touch the 40 cal. Super powerful, way more deadly. And so you think they are talking about alcohol here that's way below the levels of alcohol that we have today. And they're still saying, who is this person who has suffering and woe and babbling and pains, and he has bruises that he forgot how he got them, and he's got redness of eyes because he's just absolutely plastered out of his mind, and he's going, I have no idea what just happened to me. That's at low level alcohol? And you're going to hand your son a bottle of fortified alcohol? Boy, talk about dangerous. And look what he says. He goes, who is this person? It is the person who tarries long at the wine and who goes and seeks after mixed wine. Control your appetites. But it looks good. Control your appetites. But I'm sitting to eat with a ruler and they just want to serve me this. Control your appetites. Why do you think he says to deacons? He says, hey, deacons, you're not to be given to much wine. Because you as a deacon might end up ending in someone's house. You don't know what they're handing you. And they might hand you by accident something that's alcoholic and you drank it and you didn't realize what you drank. And he's saying, you better not be the type of guy who's given to that because you might be like, that was kind of good. Can I have another one? And you notice he says to pastors, you are not to be given to wine, period. So it's the idea of, even if they hand it, if you don't know what that is, you don't drink it. Because he's saying, you are such a higher standard, because you can't afford to be a babbler, sore-eyed. And that's why he's putting out these warnings, because he says, you just need to be very, very careful. And he's saying, who has these wounds and injuries and suffering and pains that are needless? The people who look and linger. Control your appetite. those who tarry long at the wine, those who seek mixed wine. And look what he says in verse 31. Again, he's using very extreme language on purpose. It's the same echo that we saw in verse 1, where he says, when you sit to eat with a ruler, consider diligently what is before you, and put a knife to your throat if you're given to appetite. He's not saying literally cut your throat. He's just saying, you better take yourself hostage. It's the same language we saw when he talked about discipline, and he said, if you beat him with a rod, he won't die. He's using extreme language to get our attention and say, pay attention to this. If you are someone who is given to appetite, you better take yourself hostage. And if you're someone who you're like, well, I can't discipline my own kid. He goes, you better discipline him or the world's going to do it. And then you get to this point right here where he says, if you are someone who is given to appetite, boy, it's better you walk through that store with your eyes closed and you're running into everything. This isn't saying you can never walk up an aisle, and if you walk up an aisle and you're like, I'm in the alcohol aisle. It's not, no. He's saying if you are someone who is susceptible to this sin, close your eyes. Do whatever you need to do to not look at it, because if you look, now suddenly, you can go back to the previous verse where it says, let not thy heart envy sinners. Why? Because you're looking at what they do and you're going, I kind of like that. I kind of want to be that. I kind of want some of that. It goes back to the ruler. He's sitting there to eat with you and you're going, that's actually some pretty good stuff. Hey, I kind of like your food. I kind of like, and he goes, careful. And you notice all these verses keep coming back to that same idea of you take the extreme measures to protect yourself from giving in to your appetites. Fear the Lord enough to control your appetite. And look where he goes. He says, all right, so look not on the wine when it is red, when it giveth its color in the cup, when it moveth itself aright. It's going to look all attractive and beautiful, and you're going to look at that and go, I want to try it. That's kind of cool. Rocky and I, one time, we went to an escape room convention, and they had dry ice that you could take and you could put into a drink. Now, it wasn't alcoholic or anything like that, but it was this dry ice, and it had this cool little like light up cup, and it's ridiculous what you can sell those for. Like they were talking about like $7 for this drink, and all it was basically the equivalent of fruit punch with dry ice put in the bottom of it, and it would bubble and glow, and it was super cool. And like, obviously we're looking at it going, that's kind of fun. Like, do we have an excuse to buy this? And obviously we had no excuse, so we left it behind. But it was that cool, like, bubbling effect, and you're looking at the steam come off the top of this drink, and you're like, this probably tastes absolutely horrible, but I just kind of want to put that in my mouth just to see what it feels like. And you try it, and you're like, that tastes horrible, but it was really cool looking. And what is he doing? He's saying, you come upon this drink that looks all attractive, and it's rich looking, and it's going to make you popular and famous, and it's going to get you in with that rich guy. And he goes, if you're someone who's tricked by the sight of your eyes, you better just close your eyes. You better take a knife to your throat. You better do this extreme stuff, because otherwise, something else is going to do it to you. And that's why he says, you look not on the wine when it is red, when it giveth its color in the cup, when it moveth itself aright, because he says you need to know what the end result is. And he goes this, at the last, it biteth like a serpent and stingeth like an adder. Okay? You may not agree with me, but I personally think the rattlesnake is one of the prettiest snakes in the animal kingdom. Okay? It is an absolutely beautiful looking snake. All right? And I know some of you are like, snakes? Nope. Okay. This illustration is going to completely fail on you, but this is the illustration that he uses. He says, I want you to imagine the most beautiful thing you could imagine, but you know it is unbelievably deadly. It's a beautiful thing. It's good to look at. It's attractive, but you know that if it touches you once, you're dead. And he goes, I want you to imagine that this cup of wine, bubbling, attractive, good looking, would you pick up a snake and stick the snake against your mouth? I don't think any of us are addicted to sticking snakes against our mouths. All right? I personally think the rattlesnake is a very attractive snake, but I tell you, I have never picked one up with my bare hands. I know you find that hard to believe. I haven't. Okay? I've been tempted. I really have. I pinned its head down, and I was like, I could pick up a rattlesnake right now, but no, rattlesnakes are deadly. I'm not letting it bite me. And so what you do is you protect yourself. And what's weird about a rattlesnake is when you kill a rattlesnake, you actually have to protect yourself from the head because the head will still bite you even after it's dead. It's still deadly even after it's dead. It will still bite you. So you have to take the head of that rattlesnake and you have to dispose of it in a way that no one will ever come in contact with it because it will still manage. And I've seen it try. Because what happened was I was running a camp and there's little kids around and there's this little tiny rattlesnake sitting right there. And you better believe I'm not looking at this rattlesnake going, it's fine. It's a pretty little snake. I'm just going to leave it alone. No, I'm going, deadly snake. Kids don't understand. You don't touch deadly snakes. So guess what? Sorry, I've got to be deadlier than the snake, and I had to kill it. Now, if I was off in the wilderness on myself, and I've done this, where I've come upon a rattlesnake way out in the middle of nowhere, and I'm like, there's no one around. No one's going to run into the snake. I'm going to leave it alone. But if I run into a snake in my yard, because I know it's so deadly, you better believe I am removing that snake from existence, and I'm taking a pair of pliers and grabbing it by the head so it can't bite me. That's why they use this illustration, because he says, if you are someone who has a trouble controlling your appetite, you're playing with a rattlesnake. You're playing with something that is going to destroy you. What are you doing? Say everything else you want to say about it. Why are you letting yourself there? And look what he says. He says, it at last, at the end, it's going to bite like an adder. And it's going to it's going to bite like a serpent and sting like an adder. A very, very poisonous snake. It's going to take you out. Control your appetites. Do what you need to do to keep this thing from getting near you. And that's the idea. That's why he used the illustration of a snake. Because all of us would wisely go, I'm not touching the snake. But what other sins do we play with where we're like, it's okay. It's just a little thing. It doesn't matter. I'm okay. And he says, you better just close your eyes to it and run the other way. But look where he goes. And this is so true. He goes, hey, you want to know what else this alcohol is going to do? It's going to make you struggle with this one. You're going to behold strange women. You're going to utter perverse things. You're going to say things you never thought you would say. You're going to talk about things you never thought you'd talk about. You're just, and again, if you've talked to someone who's been drunk or stoned out, they say things that you're like, what did you just say? You're going to utter things you never meant to say. You're going to talk about things you never thought you would talk about. You're going to joke about things you wouldn't joke about. And it's this idea of I've let my appetites control. And now I'm running on autopilot. But then look what he said, verse 34. Yea, thou shalt be as he who lieth down in the midst of the sea. Okay, we've worked enough with homeless people and people who are struggling with that. And there is a stagger that these people have. Because again, they're drunk. They're out of control. They've lost their balance. They've lost their ability to walk. They've lost their ability to communicate. And he says, if you are someone who is given to this, I want you to know, instead of being the guy who the king is going to look at and be like, you're such a wise counselor. You're such a good person. I'm so glad we're friends. You give me such good counsel. He goes, no. You're going to be the fool that's laughed at and who's sick and who makes an absolute fool of himself. And that's why he looks at pastors and he looks at kings and he says, you guys are not to touch this stuff. Period, end of story. Because you are having to make decisions and you are not allowed to be impaired in the least. And then he looks at deacons and he says, hey, deacons, guess what? You're in the same boat. And then he looks at the rest of us and he goes, why would you even be tempted? Why would you put yourself in this spot? No. And that's why over and over and over, every time alcohol is brought up with, again, about two exceptions, it's condemned, it's belittled, it's mocked. Why would you do it? And the positive cases for alcohol really come down to like, oh, it's a medicinal use. Or, okay, I mean, yeah, you guys are having a festival and you're going to pour this, and it's like this side comment off in the back part of some book. And we can talk about those. But if I'm looking and I say 99 times out of 100, this thing is condemned, looked down upon, and said, don't even touch it. It's too dangerous for you. Why would I do it? Sure, there's that one guy who can play with rattlesnakes and not get bit. Is that a motive for the rest of us to be like, see, he can do it. I'm going to do it. No, I think we'd all go, something's wrong with that guy. Good. I'm glad you, of all people, can't get bitten by the rattlesnake. So good, you keep doing your thing, man. I'm going to take the high road and stay away. But again, it's all that idea of control your appetite and fear God enough to not fall into this. But then look at what happens. He says, if you get into this, you're going to utter perverse things. You're going to struggle with these sins you should never have struggled with. You are going to be as he who lieth in the midst of the sea. You're unstable. You're unbalanced. You're falling over. You are one who lies on the top of a mast. Okay? If you've ever been up kind of really, really high, everything's really accentuated when you're really, really high. Okay? I've never sat on the top of a mast, so I can't claim that one. But I have sat on top of an 80-foot tall tree. And that's weird. Like everything around you is moving, and you're like, this is disorienting. Imagine being on the top of a mast in the middle of the ocean, hitting those waves, and your whole body's going back and forth like this. And he says that's what being drunk's like. Why would you do that? Why would you willingly walk into that? Verse 35, he goes, and you're also going to have this attitude. They have stricken me, and I was not sick. What? What are you talking about? But it's that idea of, oh man, I survived. I was okay. I mean, it hurt for a little bit, but I'm better now. And look what he says. They have beaten me, and I felt it not. Remember it said, you babbling, wounds without cause, you do things that you never thought you would do, you're completely confused, and he goes, why would you walk into that? You're going to be the type who you've been beaten and you didn't feel it. You got hurt and you weren't sick. Well, you were sick, you just didn't feel it because you were completely out of it. And he goes, they have beaten me and I felt it not. And he goes, what happens? When I awake, I will seek it yet again. That's not meant to be an encouragement. That's not meant to be a go and do likewise, okay? That's meant to be, why would you put yourself in those shoes? Now, we could go through several other passages. I won't do it tonight. But as you go through the rest of these passages, again, he's going to talk through things like Proverbs 30 or 31. It says, hey, you know what? It's not for kings, O Lemuel. It's not for kings to drink wine. And again, there's all these other passages we could go to, but I want you to see that overwhelming sense of these things. You need to control your appetite. You need to fear God. And again, the Father is saying to his kids, follow me as I follow Christ, and it'll keep you from these sins. It'll keep you from these things that will consume you. And so again, I realize that there are times, and like, for instance, in our culture right now, there used to be the argument of like, don't do drugs because they're illegal. And then suddenly they all became legal. And now you have to have the discussion of, okay, how do I tackle this one when they're all legal and I can't play the legal card anymore? You know, when prohibition was around, you could play the card of, well, alcohol is illegal, so you shouldn't drink because it's illegal. And then it becomes legal. Okay, what do you do? Well, you got to walk through it from a moral level. You got to walk through it from a wisdom level. There's several ways you've got to now approach this. But there's a level where there's people who just go, I really don't care. I can control it. I really don't care what this says. I am strong enough to do this. And what Proverbs is trying to stress, and this is where parents come in and stress this with the kids, no, you're not. And we could go through illustration after illustration after illustration of men in the Bible who thought they were strong enough to handle these two things, and it destroyed them. Samson, Solomon, David. I mean, that's why you get to the point where it says, hey, pastors, no, never, ever. Just get it in your head. Hey, kings, no, never. If you're in a rulership position, no, never. Why? Because it's so impairing, it's so destructive, and it's so deadly that it's trying to stress to those of us who are in a stronger spiritual state, supposedly, you're not strong enough. You're not strong enough to handle this. And that's why he keeps saying, and he says at the very end, but it's our foolish human heart that says, it's okay. And yeah, I got sick and I got beaten up and I have no idea how that happened, but I'm going to go right back and chase it again. I have a friend who's dying of cancer, and he's lost a good part of his internal organs. And he looks at it and he goes, yeah, I did this to myself. He's like, I don't blame God for this at all. It was my drugs. It was my alcohol. It was all the stuff I was in. And I bet if he could go back and say, I'm never going to take that first one, he would. And that's the thing. We don't know what the long-term effects of what we allow right now are going to be. Something like alcohol, we can make the moral case and say, don't touch it. But what about gluttony? What about some of the other sins that we can let take control of our lives? And that's why, generally speaking, this passage is not just about alcohol. It's about control your appetites. Don't envy wicked doers. Fear the Lord enough that you follow the right way. Otherwise, you're going to be that guy who's completely blinded, who's completely plastered, and the moment you come to your senses, you go right after it again because your appetites are now controlling you. So that is the end of Proverbs 23. There's a lot more we could say on that topic, and if you need me to, I can. But I think I've covered that pretty thoroughly. So let's open it up for questions or comments, though. Okay? So if you've got specific verses or other things, we can deal with them. But I've kind of explained the overall general consensus of the Bible. Hopefully that was clear enough. But questions or comments as we wrap up tonight? Mike?
Rehoboam.
Rehoboam?
Yeah, King Solomon's son.
Oh, I mean, he had bad counselors.
Well, yeah, but I mean, he was raised
Oh, yeah.
with this information. I suppose that we could say that King Solomon didn't follow his own advice.
I think that's it.
But we don't really see in the, I don't think, I think that's what I'm asking. We don't really see in the text Rehoboam, rebelled against his father and didn't follow any of his advice and thought the Psalms stunk.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, so Rehoboam, it's interesting when you look at his story, he had two different types of counselors that came to him. One were the younger generation, who basically were saying, oh, you think your dad punished people bad, you need to go all in and make it even worse. And the elderly who had been there with Solomon said, listen, if you go gentle on them right now, they'll be your servants forever. And so Rehoboam listened to the younger generation and went brutal, and the people were like, yeah, we're not taking this. So Rehoboam got bad advice, and he listened to the bad advice. But if you also look back, David didn't really live well. And so Solomon kind of followed David's footsteps. Solomon lived well for a while, but then Solomon, he didn't live this. So he can write down all these good proverbs. Like, he's got the wisdom upstairs, but he wasn't really living it. Like, especially Solomon to be like, yeah, don't go after strange women. Solomon, you went after 1,000 of them, dude. But he could speak the truth, he just wasn't living it. So, I mean, Solomon talks about his parties. He talks about the alcohol consumption that he did, and he's like, oh, I went after everything. I did all the stuff. And yet Solomon's writing these proverbs saying, my son, don't go after this. So I think Rehoboam probably listened more to what his dad did rather than what his dad said. And then Rehoboam listened to the bad counselors, and that just destroyed the kingdom. So. Okay. I had to think about why you were asking about Rehoboam for a moment. I was like, this is a gotcha if I've ever heard one. It's like, why Rehoboam of all things? But, yeah. Oh, and that's good. I hadn't thought about that. So, that's why you're a deacon. Leo.
I just want to say something about verse 31. How I don't know how to say it, but when you're traveling or whatever you're doing, they know how to entice you, because I don't know anything about alcohol. I have not tasted them, but
yeah.
And then I would always say, "Oh, what is that? How come there's umbrella and there's a color and
yeah.
I want those." And I didn't realize that there were alcoholic drinks.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was at the Highland Games of all things, and you know that the Irish and the Scottish, they're not known for their teetotaling behavior. And so I was at the Highland Games, and they had home brewed soda, and it was all in kegs and all, it's a birch beer. And I'm walking up to the thing, and I'm like, is this alcoholic? And they're like, no, it's just the soda. I was like, okay. But they made it look all attractive, and it actually made me pause, because I was like, I don't know what this is, but it turned out it was just soda. But yeah, it threw me off. And I've known of people who've done that, where they've, taken communion or something in some foreign place, and they found out later, like, oh, that was actual wine. And God's not like going to strike you dead or condemn you, but it's saying, like, just you got to be careful. The devil knows how to make what he's trying to trick you with very attractive by making it bubble or giving it a little bit of special color or a little umbrella, little salt. Anyway, so he does things to try to attract your eye, and you've got to control yourself. So that's good. That's good. I like it. All right. Any other questions or comments tonight?